area that we see that's often neglected when we do mobility work is our thoracic spine and our rib cage. This area of our body is really important for transferring power from our lower body to our upper body, especially when we talk about any sort of rotational forces. It also gives us a stable foundation for that loaded overhead position, and it affects the way we breathe. If we don't have good rib cage excursion, we're not going to have good respiratory function. And people that have respiratory dysfunction will do quite a bit better when we get that thoracic spine and that rib cage to move better. So when we think about our rib cage, the way it attaches to our body, along the back it does directly attach to our spine. So any restricted mobility of those ribs is going to affect the way that spine moves and anything above it and below it, right? So your neck and your low back. In the front, it attaches to your sternum. And there's some big muscle attachments there. Our pec muscles, those muscles that help us do our push-up or our bench press position, they also help give us that stable position, that overhead reach. Now along the bottom of our rib cage is our diaphragm, and that diaphragm is our breathing muscle. And as it contracts, we take our inhale, and as it relaxes, it exhales for us. And our diaphragm also separates our trunk into an upper and lower half. And in the upper half is our heart and lungs, and in the lower half is the rest of our vital organs. So there needs to be a lot of play in between there, right? Because our rib cage expands and contracts, so it changes shapes all the time. Which is why when we have a rib injury, it takes a long time to heal, because we can't really rest it, right? It needs to constantly move. That diaphragm needs to constantly work too. So if we get our rib cage moving better and our diaphragm functioning more efficiently, not only does it help us with that rotational force and that overhead foundation position, but it also helps our breathing function. So to get that rib cage to move, one of the best tools to use is a foam roll. So if you don't have a foam roll, you can roll up a towel. Some people will do well with a soccer ball or a volleyball, something like that. But you can be creative with this, so we'll go over the techniques and you can figure out how you want to work on this on your own. So what we first want to start with is laying on our back and the foam roll behind us. And a lot of people will know, or will just figure out that just rolling up and down kind of feels good, right? That kind of softens up some of those tissues. It's a good starting spot. What we want to do to start mobilizing the joint space of the thoracic spine and the ribs individually is we're going to hug ourselves, put both arms across our body, and then as I get through this position, I can try to arch myself back, right? So I'm creating some extension over the foam roll. And as I play around with it, I find my spot where I feel a restriction. And then from there, I might take a deep breath, right? Because that makes my rib cage move. It makes it expand and contract. And that can be my mobilization, right? I also might find a spot and I want to kind of roll side to side on it, right? And that'll help me loosen up. And maybe when I roll to a side, I find, oh, there's my really restricted spot. Now I take my deep breath, make that rib cage move, and then mobilize it that way. We can also do from this position is if I lift my butt up and I reach my arms up all over my head, as I find my position, now I can drop my butt down, and that could be a mobilization for me. And again, get to my spot, take my deep breath, and relax it. And then we kind of start working from directly on the back towards the sides. So as I turn about a quarter of about 45 degrees, so not directly on my side, but between my back and my side, I can keep in this position, and I'm going to work on almost a side bend position there, right? And I can play around with that. And again, I get to my spot, I hold it, take my big breath for my mobilization, and then I can continue to work all the way into a pure side lying position. And I want to work up and down that rib cage. So remember, rib cage comes all the way up to right below the shoulder, right? Actually, when we reach the top of our shoulder right here, this is actually a rib right here. So we want to cover this big area here of our trunk. So the next thing we want to work on is the rotation after we get those ribs mobile a little bit more, because that's really one of the primary functions of our thoracic spine, is to create rotation. So a good way to do that is if we get into the on knees position, then we go down onto our forearms, and then we take our hand and reach it behind our head. And then this elbow, I'm going to point up at the ceiling, right? So that's working on rotation in one direction. And then as I want to rotate the other direction, I'm going to take this elbow, I'm going to put it between my knee and my opposite elbow, and then back up towards the ceiling. Right, so that's how I can work on thoracic rotation there. Another way we can do this is if I lay on my side and I keep my knees and my hips about 90 degrees and I put both my hands together, and you can use a pillow here if you need to. As I lift up this top arm and I rotate it back, I'm going to keep looking at this thumbnail so my head goes with it and comes back. Now if I get to this position and my knees start to come up, that means I don't have enough rotation in my thoracic spine. You should be able to get this arm completely flat to the other side, right, without picking your legs up. So if you can't do that, you need to work on that thoracic rotation. The last part that we want to work on after we get those ribs moving a little bit better is some of the respiratory function. So a good way you can do this on your own is if we start laying on our back with our knees bent, we're gonna reach our arms up over our head so they're flat on the ground. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lift my butt up, and then from here I'm gonna take a nice big breath. I wanna fill my rib cage, and then I'm gonna hold my breath as I lower my butt back down to the ground. And I wanna be able to get my butt all the way back to relax while holding my breath the whole time. So I lift up, I take my big breath, expand that rib cage as much as I can, and then while I'm holding that breath, I lower my butt down. So that's gonna put some tension through our trunk and through that diaphragm, so it's gonna help us to get better respiratory function. So work on these things, try to get that thoracic spine mobile. It's gonna affect a lot of the way you function, and you might find some areas that are discomforting that you didn't know that you had already. Like I said in the beginning, this area is really neglected. We don't think about our rib cage and our thoracic spine as an area that we need to work on very much, but if we don't work on it, it can be a big limiting factor for all the things that we do.